We talked earlier about the nerd factor of running. We were not the coolest people on the block. And he was literally the James Dean of running. Steve Prefontaine was completely counterculture. Porn star mustache. He actually had pecs. He wasn't like a skinny runner. Big mop of hair. Loved the women. Loved his beer. But at the same time, he held every American record from 2,000 meters to 10,000 meters when he died tragically in 1975. For all the nerd factor of running, if you can identify with a guy like Pre, a guy who was just so aggressive when he ran, like he was not passive. He always went to the front. He dared people to come with him. It was just this kind of rabid form of racing. And he had a cult following. I think even James Dean would envy what Prefontaine had back then because it was really, really cool.
Welcome to the Renegade Podcast. Each episode, we set off to better understand what it means to run, to be a runner, giving you the confidence that you can achieve way more than what you believe is possible. Today, we are truly excited to sit down with one of our favorite storytellers and fellow runner, Martin Dugard, a New York Times best-selling author whose work has transported millions into the heart of history, from Into Africa to the wildly successful Killing series. But in his brand new book, The Long Run, Martin takes us into the golden age of running, that transformative decade when Steve Prefontaine, Frank Shorter, Joan Benoit, and Grete Waitz didn't just change the sport, they changed how we understand human potential. In this conversation, we explore the deeper why behind the run, the resilience, the obsession, the quiet courage, and what their stories can teach us all about showing up, pushing limits, and finding meaning in the long run of life. Martin Dugard, welcome, our friend. We're glad to have you on the podcast.
What are you sipping on over there tonight?
Well, Mark, I got a special treat because Jen went into Kingsville to the Red Lantern coffee shop, and
you didn't
a hyena IPA.
Those are hard to find.
So what are you going to enjoy tonight, Mark?
So I had to go to the back of my fridge and dig and find something, and I happened to pull out a
Yes, you did.
It's high electrolyte hyena. You know what? We were watching a show last night with hyenas in it, and those are some interesting critters. My goodness.
Whether you're out for a long run and the decade that made the marathon cool, and you're not looking like a fool, there's a hyena IPA for you. No,
for you.
For you.
I'm like, how are you going to rhyme with cool? Take you back to words. Oh, it's the marathon goes old school.
What constitutes a renegade? I like that though.
Ooh, that's $1 million question. We're still trying to figure it out. It's the running rebel, just the everyday runner. Our audience, I would say, primarily mixed with a lot of mid-pack runners and a lot of new runners. Mm-hmm. So renegades are those guys and gals that are just getting out every single day. I'm thinking, Martin, when I read the book, these were the original renegades. The original renegades, for sure.
It's true. It's probably true. Yeah. So, okay, I'm all in. I'm all in for the renegade.
Martin, welcome to the podcast. We are so excited to talk to you, a New York Times bestseller. And you've spent decades as a historian bringing stories to life, epic stories to life. What drew you back to your first love, which is running, for this new book, The Long Run, and the decade that made the marathon cool?
Well played. I like the way you presented the book like that. That's fantastic. Well, you know what? At some point, as a writer, you kind of go around your career and you write books that or seem important at the time, and then all of a sudden you get to a certain point and you say you want to write something that really matters to you personally, and that's what happened with this because I didn't set out to write the book that it became. And the matter of fact, the number one thing that people tell me is like it's not what I thought it was going to be. I think a lot of people think that The Long Run is going to be some boring, repetition of stories about, iconic runners like Frank Shorter and Grete Waitz and Steve Prefontaine. And instead, it magically kind of wove itself into something different, which is what often takes place during the creative process. So I'm really glad I wrote this book because it took me to a really good cathartic place as a runner where I wanted to rediscover my roots, going all the way back to when I was 12 and 13 and first running. And so to the point that I literally, after a 20-year break between marathons, I just applied for the London lottery for next year. So I'm back. I feel
Martin's
good about
back. We love it.
That's wonderful. And so, Martin, you were born in Maine and you ended up in California. So, and when you went to California, you were also coaching high school runners. So, how did a kid from Maine catch that running bug that basically changed that trajectory of your life?
Well, I was an Air Force brat. So my dad, he was a jet pilot. So to stay slim and to stay in the cockpit, you had to lose a little bit of weight. So he became a runner very early in the game, back when Kenneth Cooper came out with aerobics in 1967, and Bill Bowerman came out with the whole jogging thing in 1967. And I remember one time when I was a kid watching him on base, just doing at the time it was a big deal to do a 1 mile timed run. So, and I think he broke 6, and I watched him, and I was probably 8 years old, and I thought that was pretty cool, and it kind of drew me into it. So my dad eventually went on to run, 244 at Boston. So he became a very good runner. So that became a part of our family. But as you move from base to base, so we went from Kittery, Maine to Bunker Hill in Indiana to Omaha to eventually to California, then kind of made another loop around the country later during my high school years. Running became the constant in my life. Running was the thing that, after I saw Frank Shorter win that Olympic marathon in 1972, I knew I wanted to be a runner. I wasn't a very big kid at the time, so that helped because no one was going to put me on the football team. And I just developed this love with running, an identity with running, which I think a lot of people do now. It's not just people like to run; it becomes their identity. And that was me in 1970, a long time ago.
And you speak about the identity there. So back in the 70s, then, like how could you spot another runner? Like nowadays, we have the watches, we have, there's so many different types of clothes and everything that you can wear. Where back then, was there a key identifier that you knew you were with your crew or anyone like that? You're like,
I think if you saw somebody running in short shorts, that was the big thing, because the shorts weren't, everybody wasn't wearing shorts that were all, but if you look at the pictures of the 1970 New York Marathon, everybody was kind of wearing nut huggers, but they were cotton, inevitably painful once you got to sweating, but that was kind of the symbol that you were part of that group. And like when I became a runner, in high school, we were considered extreme. We were nerds. It was just a different level there was no social acceptance of running. It was just like we were the outcasts, the people who couldn't do cool things. So we did running, and it was super fun.
Well, you mentioned about the historic context of runners being the outcast, being viewed as strange, spending hours by themselves running for no apparent reason that people can think about. And, all of a sudden, the marathon got cool. And these iconic characters, these icons in the book that you outline, Frank Shorter, Steve Prefontaine, Grete Waitz, and Joan Benoit. What made that decade so cool from your perspective that you chose to write about it? Like, looking back, like what was the coolness of that decade?
Well, it ended up being a therapy book, because I started writing it and I didn't realize that I was trying to figure things out. But again, at the start of the 70s, men, there were no tights. So if you were a dude going out for a run on a cold day, you wore pantyhose. It was just one of those things. And it to some extent still exists. Like if you went for a run on the side of a road, people would throw, they'd pull their pickup truck over and throw beer cans at you and yell at you to pick it up. And it was really very much, I want to describe it as like a James Dean environment, like a rebel without a cause. And if you were a runner, you weren't running to be rebellious, but at the same time, it was such an isolated social thing that it was your own thing. It wasn't somebody else's thing. It wasn't like you were part of a team where you had to conform. You could just go, and if you found it, whether you want to run the roads or I preferred to run on the trails. So I would just disappear on these these trails, and it just felt effortless, and it felt like a wonderful thing. And I feel like when you got to the later 1970s and it became a little bit more conformist, all of a sudden like, for instance, when I was my high school team, if we showed up we didn't have what's called a training uniform, which you would have today. Like, our shorts never matched and our shoes never matched, and our t-shirts were, probably had holes in them. But when the running boom came in the late 1970s, all of a sudden everybody had matching clothes and matching shoes, and it was a whole different vibe. And the problem became incorporating that independent vibe with this new thing, because otherwise you risk not running at all. You risk saying, like, I don't want to be a runner because I don't want to be around these people who are so conformist. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
The Renegade is proud to be sponsored by Thrive Protein. Power your runs and fuel your endurance with Thrive Protein, the premier Canadian-made supplement brand crafted for endurance athletes. This family-owned brand uses a science-based approach to develop high-quality electrolytes, a carbon electrolyte powder, creatine, vegan protein powders, whey protein, and super greens, and they are constantly innovating. Recently brought to market EnduraFuel, hydration and fuel all in one. Each serving offers 30 grams of carbs in a 2-to-1 ratio of glucose to fructose. You also get sodium, potassium, calcium, and some magnesium, replenishing all the elements that you're sweating out during your efforts. It gives your body the energy it needs to perform at its peak. Plus, the lemonade flavor tastes amazing. Thrive is perfect for any athlete chasing any distance. Visit thriveprotein.ca and use the code RENEGADE for 20% off your order. Thrive Protein. Fuel your relentless pursuit of adventure.
You had people who were, who were revolutionaries, people who were nonconformists, people who were along for the fad. And slowly, amazingly, instead of that peaking in the late 70s, it has continued to grow to this day. So running, which was kind of a little niche thing, it's like, pick something like skateboarding. Skateboarding has done well, but it's not like running. Like, running is one of those things that got big in the 70s, got bigger in the 80s, bigger in the 90s. And by the time we're where we are now, 1.1 million people applied to the London Marathon in 26. So it keeps growing. There's a fascination there. And again, it's because we all get to be unique. You go to these big city marathons and you see men wearing tutus running alongside women in wings. And at the same time, or, go to Bay Break, or some people are just running flat out naked. The cool thing about it is, like, everybody's a runner, no matter what kind of running you want to do.
That's it. They just, let their freak flags fly and get out there, and there's a run for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And so I imagine that with the research that you've done for this book, and many of your other books too as well, but like for this one in particular, some really interesting little known facts that you've picked up that maybe didn't quite make the book. Is there anything that you're still holding on to for something in the future, or something that just didn't quite fit in?
There's a whole bunch, because I think a lot of the stuff about running, which has now become legend, were once myths, like the whole thing about Pheidippides running up to Athens and dropping dead, and the thing about the British royal family determining the fate of the marathon. The interesting thing, and I missed it in the book, is that Lord Desborough, who's the guy who was the organizer of the London 1908 Olympics, and he, in the book, I don't make him a link directly to Teddy Roosevelt, but both of them, like, Desborough is the reason we have 26.2. Teddy Roosevelt's the reason we had a subsequent marathon boom in the United States immediately after 1908. And, I kind of fell short a little bit in my research, because only later did I say, in the book, I say they might have known each other. Then I did some research and I realized they really did know each other. So they were both instrumental in the marathon becoming 26.2. But I can see why they get along. Teddy Roosevelt's a big game hunter. He's a fisherman. He's an outdoorsman. He's very robust. And Lord Desborough was the same exact dude. I can see those guys sitting down and having a great time together. Not runners, but definitely charted the course of running.
That was one thing I love at the start of the book, when you walk through from Philippides to the start of the marathon. as a runner who's been running for 10, 15 years, one thing I didn't know was that the marathon distance seemed to change from the inception throughout time until they settled upon this 26.2 mile beast that we have before us. And that was really interesting to say that, this country, they ran 40 kilometers and they tried to switch over to metric and an imperial. When you were researching that, did that surprise you as well? Did you kind of know that going in, or is that something that came out of the research? Like, oh, I did not know that.
Oh, and that's one of the great things about one of the great liberties you get as a writer if you're really going to do the research, is you don't accept former truths and you do the digging. And when I found out that we went from 40K to 26.2 to something longer, and there was an out and back marathon, I think, in Stockholm or something like that. Like, I didn't know any of that, and I thought that was really, really cool. And the interesting thing about that 26.2 is if every marathon had just been 40K, I don't think we'd have the fascination. I remember, finishing New York a few times where I really wanted to respond to the crowd as I went up Central Park South and back into the park, but my hamstrings wouldn't work, my quads wouldn't work. But if we'd finished at 24, whereas you come back into the park, I would have been fine. It would have been amazing. So that's kind of the curse of the marathon. It's the beauty of the marathon.
I laugh a little bit because a few years back, when we were all kind of locked in our houses at the start of COVID, there was at work, we had this online kind of trivia contest. In this trivia contest, how far is the marathon? So I wrote 26.2 miles. And then a few people wrote 26 miles. And the person moderating says, 26 miles, this person wins. And I'm like, no, it's 26.2.
Oh,
and then someone goes, close enough. And I'm like, you're obviously not a runner, because that last 0.2 is a killer. And then sure enough, they revised I won the question. I didn't know.
I remember when I was in high school, I was taking, I think it was a math class, and they were trying to introduce the metric system to America. And the teacher said, what is 10 kilometers? And I said, well, 6.232. And he goes, how did you know that? I said, I'm a runner. It's like, it's a 10K. And it's just the things you know.
Just the things you're bang on. And you touched on it in one of your answers. You were going through talking about the coolness of runners and the running boom. Like that first big running boom in the 70s, it's continued, and in the last 5 or 6 years, it's boomed again. The numbers are high at all the major marathons. It's tough to get into any marathon nowadays. And I find it interesting. We have a lot of new runners that listen to this podcast, and in the book, I would say that Steve Prefontaine was your hero. He's my hero. I love Steve Prefontaine. But maybe you could help introduce to some of these new listeners who just started running, who may never have heard this icon, Steve Prefontaine, just an element of who he was and what he brought to the sport.
Yeah, so we talked earlier about the nerd factor of running. Again, it was just we were not the coolest people on the block. And he was literally the James Dean of running. He did not, like Jim Ryan was the 1960s runner. He, short hair, teetotaler, amazing athlete, but just completely, aligned with whatever was going on, in America at the time. Whereas Steve Prefontaine was completely counterculture, porn star mustache. He actually had pecs. He wasn't like a skinny runner, big mop of hair. Loved the women, loved his beer, but at the same time, he held every American record from 2,000 meters to 10,000 meters when he died tragically in 1975. And I've had people even say, well, Steve Prefontaine doesn't count for the running boom because he's not a real runner. I hate that term, because he didn't do a marathon. But I guarantee you, if Prefontaine had lived, he would have probably been running the marathon in LA in 1984 at the age of 33, which isn't that old. So, but for me, as a young runner trying to find an identity, Prefontaine was on the cover of Sports Illustrated a couple times. He was just cool. And so for all the nerd factor of running, if you can identify with a guy like Pre, a guy who was just so aggressive when he ran, like he was not passive. He always went to the front. He dared people to come with him. It was just this kind of rabid form of racing. And he had a cult following. I think even James Dean would envy what Prefontaine had back then, because it was really, really cool. Pre was He was amazing. I had his poster on my wall, and that's not retro speak talking, because right now with my runners, I just left, I raced from practice to do this podcast. My runners, especially the guys, when they talk about the guy that they want to be as a runner, it's not Matt Centrowitz, it's not, anybody, it's not Jared Naguse, it's not, it's Prefontaine. They want to learn how to race from the front. They want to be badass like him. They wear his t-shirts. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And how readily available was like his t-shirts? You said you had a poster on the wall. So this is also something that was brand new at that time, I would imagine as well. Like just somebody like having this kind of merch available, right?
Yeah. Well, Nike was big about that. Jeff Johnson, the guy who took the iconic photo of finishing when he broke the 10,000 meter record, and he's wearing his Olympic singlet from '72, and this is a couple of years later. He's got his hands thrown up in victory. He was just telling me that people just were looking for that stuff, because I think there was a group of people, and I was not unique, where people really wanted to have someone they could identify with as a runner, who wasn't like George Sheehan, who was a great running philosopher. But if you're a 17-year-old high school boy, you're not going to relate to a running philosopher. You want someone who's going to kick ass, and frankly, someone who's going to get laid. Because you want to think at some point, you as a young boy, you have hope for attracting women into your life, which is not something that happens in this world of just running philosophers and thoughtful people doing running. You want someone who kicks ass. It's just like, it's the same reason people follow NBA and NHL and NFL stars now.
Mustache and pecs certainly help, right? So,
and a great set. He had a nice flow. He had that hair that was just flowing in the wind, kind of like the 70s and 80s hockey players who had the no helmet.
I've got a picture right over there. I can't get it to you, but it's him at the 1972 5,000 at the Munich Olympics. Man, he looks so badass. It's the coolest thing ever.
Well, I would say for the new runners listening, if you've never heard of Steve Prefontaine before, Google it, YouTube, check this guy's story out, buy the book, because Martin does a great job of outlaying who Steve Prefontaine was, his running career. You mentioned it. He, at one point in time, he had all the records from the 2,000 meter all the way to the 10,000 meter. And I think about a few months ago, I was messing around with AI, and I said, imagine Steve Prefontaine was still alive. What do you think he could have ran the marathon in, looking at all his race? And AI went into like the VO2 max and all this stuff. And I think it said that it predicted to run a 2:02 marathon in the 1980s. And that would have been unbelievable, just because the it factor was the ability to manage pain, to, be out, to seek out the pain and then stay with it and run super hard from the front. To run a 2:02 marathon in the 1980s would have been amazing. It's tough to say, because, I watched the Prefontaine movie, like his 1998 with Donald Sutherland. That's where I fell in love with Steve Prefontaine. Great movie. And it was so heartbreaking, because gone before his time and gone before all the potential that he was training for. And it's tough. It's tough to think of what could have been, and happy though what actually was with Steve.
Yeah, he lives on. He's one of those iconic characters, and it's weird because Frank Shorter, who was one of his training partners, won the 1972 Olympic marathon. Frank is still here with us, but I would say Pre is still more famous than Frank, ironically. But what I liked about writing this book was finding all those stories. So I think when my publisher asked for a book about the running boom, they thought it would be a very singular snapshot moment in American history. And what I found was it's an arc. It starts well before 1970 and it goes all the way to today. And to be able to keep certain characters within that arc, like Steve Prefontaine, is completely satisfying, because it's almost like when you read a great epic novel and one of the characters, think of Game of Thrones, when the Sean Byrne character dies off in like episode 3 of the series, but still the series carries on and he's still present at the very end. That's that's Prefontaine in the running world right now, to make a very extreme example.
And one of the things too that, not one of the things, sorry, but one of the people you also highlight in your book is Bill Rodgers, as well as being the everyday man. So he brought that to something that everyday runners could do. So how did you find exploring his story? We've had Billy on the podcast before as well. So when you got to dive deep into Billy, what were some of the key things that I mean, obviously it's in the book, but just some of the aha moments that you found with him, and how does it compare to what you learned about Prefontaine as well?
Well, I talked to Bill for the book, and I tell you what a sweetheart. That guy is the nicest guy. And I guarantee you, he has told his story about 1975 Boston, that 209.55, 10,000 times. And when he talked to me about it, it was like he was talking about it for the very first time. And what a lot of people don't know is that, Prefontaine had become attached to Nike just prior to that race, and he sent Rodgers the shoes that he eventually wore at Boston in 1975. And here's the behind the scenes thing about this book is I really pushed to get Rodgers on the cover because it's pre-Shorter Rodgers and then Greta, and there wasn't room. So it's like we can only do 4. We have to lose somebody, and we lost Billy. And I haven't reached out to him, but I would like to reach out to him to say, dude, I'm sorry, you should have been on the cover, but we just didn't have room for you. But I'm pretty sure he'd understand because his great motivation came. He ran for Wesleyan in college. One of his great friends was Amby Burfoot, who won the 1968 Boston Marathon. Rodgers trained with him, ran with him the whole marathon distance. What people forget is that Rodgers was so impressed by Shorter's victory in 1972 that he gave up smoking and became a runner again. And then his 209.55 was an 11-minute PR, which is just crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so once the running boom took off in the late 70s, I don't really go into it because there's just not enough room for it. But, him, Alberto Salazar, a couple other guys, that was what put it forward. That was kind of, Frank Shorter had a couple of good years after that, but then it became all Rodgers.
And what I loved about the stories about Bill that you shared is that iconic, you touched on it earlier about the runner's apparel. Well, was it the 1975 Boston? He had a t-shirt on that he wrote his own track club on there. He wrote his name on it. And he had the Nike shoes that Prefontaine sent him, and they were the wrong size. And he still went out there and hammered and won and never complained about it. Like most runners would be like, oh, I didn't do my best because my shoe came in. But he stopped to untie his shoes. And then he told us he didn't even there was no nutrition back then. So remember Mark, he was saying that he didn't even drink water. And we're like, Bill, did you not know you could drink water on the course? It's amazing to see that type of athlete caliber. If they would have had today's technology, training, and professionalism, what could have happened? Because they were running for all the right reasons. The love of running, I would say that.
Oh yeah, and you think about it, like carbo loading was a brand new thing. And so, it was a theory basically that people began saying like, I'm going to have spaghetti the night before the race and a couple of beers, which Shorter did before the night before Munich. And then it used to be not completely, but kind of a sign of weakness if you wanted water during a race. Like tough guys don't need water. And then when Gatorade came in back in the late 60s, it was fun to find that in an old copy of Runner's World, the first pictures of Gatorade being used at the race. Well, Gatorade's a great product, but it's not equivalent with some of the modern gel and hydration products that were used, for instance, at London in 2026. So it was just a different mindset. But, you go all the way back to the 1908 Olympics where runners didn't drink water because they thought it would bloat them, but they would have, steak and egg for breakfast. So
steak
we've
and
come
eggs
a long way.
breakfast.
And I feel too, 100 years from now, when people are running marathons at 145 or 150, they're going to look back at what we're doing right now as equally primitive. It's despite the shoes, despite everything else, the shoes that were worn by Shorter, Rodgers, and Prefontaine and Grete Waitz and Joan Benoit, those were considered state of the art and revolutionary and the best we were ever going to do with shoes. I mean, a lot of thought had gone into those shoes, and now they look like sandals. We've come so far in 50 years.
And actually, I've got a coaching question on that one. So this is a little bit of a fun one. So if you could go back in time for one of Billy's big Boston wins and be either a crew or, help him pace, what would you do to help him crush it? Or what would you do? Or would you do the same thing? Like, how would you help him if you go back knowing what you know now with, technology and all your coaching skills?
Well, the thing is, Rodgers ran a bunch. Like Shorter ran 140 miles a week, 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon. Rodgers was right there. But I feel like if I did it now, I'd do a little bit more of that Norwegian method double thresh, where you kind of run just a little bit below your threshold level as you increase your base and you focus a little bit less on speed. I don't know, but here's the weird thing. It's like all the modern running technology, and I spent a lot of time as a coach trying to tweak my methods. I've won 7 state California championships as a coach, but you're always trying to be better and learn more. And what I loved about the way that those guys trained was very intuitive. And it's the way the Africans still train. Like if you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling good, you don't just hammer automatically. You just, maybe you go easy, maybe, and you let your body recover, where a lot of people love the idea of just, going hard every single day. And pretty soon they break down, they can't increase their volume. It's just a whole different thing. You have to be able to listen to your body. And I think that's what Rodgers and Shorter did really well. And both of them, by the way, had different running economies. If you look at the way Shorter ran, he was as smooth and as perfect as Kipchoge was in 2018 when he did that sub 2. And then Rodgers, on the other hand, he's got an arm going out here. He's doing all this stuff, but yet it worked for him. It made his gait as seamless as it could be for him.
So some water and gels as well will help him along the way.
Yeah, I would give him some gels, but I don't know. Like the gels now. When I did adventure racing, 20 years ago, the Red Gauloise and Eco Challenge, the gels then were just pure sugar. Now where everything is really high calorie, and Tour de France riders are doing the same thing, and triathletes are doing the same thing. You get so much out of learning how to use, how to never bonk, how to never run out of glycogen. And it really is all about managing that fitness. So imagine that you're training for a marathon at the same time you're trying to train your stomach about how to ingest enough carbohydrates and a lot of carbohydrates without you bloating or feeling like you can't process it all. That's a whole new skill. That's a book into itself. That's a whole new skill.
In the book, the one section that I enjoyed, it's tough to read because we can't relate to it. And it has to do with the rise of the amazing women runners, because I can't relate to it because I can't imagine a time that women weren't allowed to run with men because they thought the insides were going to fall out. Like, who are these doctors? Like, this is the most ridiculous thing, because wouldn't the guy's butt fall out? Like, you get like, like, come on. Like, yeah, what was most surprising when you researched it? Did you uncover something that you didn't know before? Like, for us, we have 2 daughters. We grew up competing with women and seeing them run, but I can't imagine a time when they weren't allowed.
Well, you know what? So I kind of leaned into running when I was about 1972. I was about 11 years old. And then I joined a youth club during my junior high school years, so 7th and 8th grade. And we would go do these relay races around Lake Tahoe or up and down the California coast, or just regular 10Ks. And there were women everywhere. And, when you're 13 or 14 years old, you're not, doing a head count and seeing what is the proportion. But I was used to seeing women in races. In the book, I mentioned this, I got dropped by the great Joan Benoit, Dr. Joan Benoit, one of the pioneers of women's running. And she was remorseless when she passed me. She didn't say, Hey, little man, how you doing? Can I help you? She was like, good race. Boom. She was gone. And I was used to that and I respected it. So when I began writing the book, I wanted to do it with a chronology, and I wanted to make sure the women came in organically. I wasn't going to insert them in the story before they came along. And what amazed me was the women really didn't step up until 1978 when Greta won her first New York. Joni won her first Boston shortly after. And then the weird thing is when I started going through the Boston and New York websites, and I probably should have done more of a check of the 10K and 5K level, but the bottom line is women still weren't more than 10 or 15% of the race population. So now we're so used to women it being 50-50. You go to the line. London next year, 2027, is talking about doing one is just a completely women's day, and one is a completely men's day, and both will sell out, which is phenomenal. But women didn't really come into the fore until the 1990s when Oprah ran her first marathon. The women numbers were still low despite Joni and Greta, which blew my mind because as a runner at the time, I always just assumed that they were there. I remember 1993, I did my first New York and I was coming up Fifth Avenue and I hit 20 and I hit just the wall so hard. And I remember I was going to Fifth Avenue. I remember watching a group of women. They had their sweatshirts tied around their waist as if they were just out for a Sunday jog, just blowing past me. And so it was always in my mind that these women were always there, but it wasn't until Oprah where it just kind of blew up, where women all of a sudden became 50-50. And I think that the Rock and Roll series had something to do with it too. It was the first real marathon series. And I think that it really spoke to women who just want to do something fun. There are bands every mile. What could be wrong with it?
Amazing.
Hey runners, we all hunt that gear sweet spot, functionality that actually delivers, comfort that never quits, performance that pushes you harder, and pieces that have you looking like the badass you are out there. But the real craving? Gear that straight up disappears. No fiddling, no chafing, just pure flow and the freedom where you can crush your miles. That's where our friends at Path Projects come in clutch. I'm obsessed with their Graves PX running shorts. That independent suspension design is straight wizardry, and pockets that actually work. Their highly rated designs keep on stacking wins. Their Pyrenees hoodie, T19 Magic, with the snorkel hood and thumbhole hand protection, perfect for those crisp morning runs or just layering. It runs like a dream and chills like your favorite casual piece. Just pure performance that you forget that you're wearing. Premium everything from an independent crew that gets the runner's life. And as a special thank you, you can use the code TRP10 for 10% off your order for a limited time. Check them out, Path Projects. Whatever your path, enjoy your journey.
Love that. And I think that's it too, is that more and more, you see different celebrities, different figures in pop culture that are taking on these runs and actually putting down some pretty decent times too. I think Harry Styles is one that I saw that he's done quite well with whatever he enters to. So are you hearing and seeing a lot more of that too? It's become, with socials, it's an easy way to post things, right? And see who's doing what and that. But are you finding that that's, I guess, part of that arc too, as well, is that it's for everybody, whether you're somebody who is just a dad like us that runs as frequently as we can, or somebody that's a celebrity to stay in shape if they're dealing with grueling touring schedules and things like that. So imagine you've run into a lot of stories like that too.
Well, it's interesting. I'm a big Springsteen fan, and there are pictures of Springsteen online just running on the beach. You don't think of rock and roll stars as being people who, you think of rock and roll stars as debauchery and hard living. And there's a guy like Springsteen running bare chested at 75 years old on the beach, which is cool. As soon as we heard that Harry Styles had run a sub 3-hour marathon, we got him a book. So he's reading the long run like everybody else. Yay, Harry. But it's become, the guy who founded the London Marathon in 1981 calls the marathon the suburban Everest. It's just a bucket list. And I think that we all think as just average everyday people that if that doesn't apply to us, but it touches celebrities too. So all these people feel just a little bit more validation when you run a marathon. There's something about doing the work, getting it done, crossing that finish line. And as much as it hurts, I mean, do you ever see people cross the finish line looking unhappy? It's just one of those wonderful things. Back when my wife was doing a lot of the Disney half marathons, I would go to support her, and she would see me, she'd run over to the side, give me a kiss halfway through the race, and then go back into it. Just one of those things. Like, there's something really joyous about being part of this collective known as the community of runners, and it's one of this wonderful thing that people choose it, not knowing that they're going to fall into that level of endorphin rush and happiness and commitment and and validation, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Well, Martin, what you were just mentioning there, Joan Benoit, I believe it was Joan that said, the marathon is less about running a time and more about the person that you become while running it. And isn't that the truth? When you run a marathon, it's not about your finish time. It's what you actually become in the process of becoming a marathoner. Did you get a sense in the research and the stories of these iconic main characters of their similarities that they had, or maybe a couple differences that they would have, that they were all running, of course, for time. They were professionals, but they enjoyed the run, the love of the run, and who they became from running. Is there anything that stood out from you?
They really did. If you look at the careers, especially of the four people on the cover, Prefontaine, Shorter, Grete Waitz, Joan Benoit, if you go and track their careers, they loved to not just run, but to race. I mean, and Joni raced all the time, Greta raced all the time. And it was just because there's something about it. There's just something about getting out there. And I think even for people at that level to commit to it, because there are a lot of sports where people, they're into it for 2 years, 3 years, they kind of fade away after a while. These veteran runners, they stay with it for a lifetime. And that's the most wonderful thing about it, was because again, every time you go for a run, every run is unique. Your runs are different from my runs, and we all have those days where we go out and we feel amazing, and those days where we feel like absolute horseshit. But at the same time, I would dare people to say that even on your worst run, you don't walk away feeling like you're just a little bit better for getting out there. Nobody says, oh, I shouldn't have run today. Nobody says that I didn't get anything out of that. Everybody feels better, even people at that elite level. And it's really, that was one of the things that was fun about the book, was finding their commitment to the sport. I mean, again, you go back to Rodgers running 140, 150 miles a week. How many times does he want to get up in the morning and say, I don't want running? So that's a serious commitment to doing something that makes you feel better. And you don't do it as many years as he did it unless you actually love it.
Yeah, you're right. I get the sense that probably Billy, when he woke up, most of those mornings he was enjoying going out for his run, because I know when I first started running, I would wake up, and I think I shared a little joke on Instagram yesterday about, I wake up every day and I dread going for a run. But then something clicked, and, new runners listening, it will click where you just want to run every single day. Like, you just want to, and it doesn't seem like a chore. I'm looking at Mark, so we got to get Mark back out running to get him ready for his fall race that he's signed up for. But yeah, there's something about that where you transform, where it just becomes a part of you, and you need to do it. You got to get your run in. I just love that feeling myself.
The runners I coach, so practice usually starts 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, and they've just come out of school. They've been, sitting in a desk chair learning all day long. And so once they show up, they're always reluctant to put their shoes on, because once you put your shoes on, even if you already have your shorts on, you're committing to the workout. And then we'll do a couple laps. It's just an easy jog, some leg swings. And then we have a series of activation drills we do before we start the workout. And I used to be really hardcore about, like, do the drills this way. You need to be specific. And I realized that the drills are their transition from the being forced to learn and sitting in a chair all day to where they get to breathe a little bit. They get to
Mhm.
be runners. So, and that's when they chat. That's when they socialize. That's when they talk to each other. And so that 15-minute period, I've made a, I've made a, I try to say, look, can we just tighten up those drills a little bit? But more important, I want them to use that transition to, you know, transform themselves, because then I'm going to ask them for the next 90 minutes to do something very difficult, which is running. And it might be an easy day, it might be a tempo day, it might be some VO2, but that little transition, that's what we all go through when, I keep my running shoes at the bottom of the stairs from, just before the front door. So the minute I sit down and on the stairs and put my shoes on, the dogs know I'm going to go out for a run, which is kind of cool. But more important, mentally, I'm getting myself in the mind frame like, I don't want to do this. I'm going to step out. I'm going to take like 20 easy yards just to see how I feel today. And then by the time I'm at the end of the block, I feel like I can't wait to do more. And I think we all go through that every day. It's just a process. And then, you finish. And whether you're, you know, in pain or you're sweaty or you're happy or you just had a long conversation with somebody that you might be running with, that's just the best part of the day. And there's that transition into going from the average version of yourself into the version of yourself that really wants to do something special and be better and to focus on something and train for something. And that's the hard part. Once we get over that cusp, it's amazing.
Absolutely. That is wonderful. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think it's great that you recognize that it's that transition from sitting in a hard desk all day long, and then that's their opportunity to come out and just kind of start that process of getting prepared for something a lot harder that is coming their way, like you said, with depending on what the drills are that day.
They well, it's interesting because when I'm coaching them, I'm coach. And when I when they're out of high school and they're into college, they want to friend me on Instagram, and that's kind of awkward. And then I'm just Dugard, and then I'm Marty. And like one of my runners, who was a great high school runner, he was a 403, 858 guy, just ran 221 at Boston while balancing a corporate job. He just decided he qualified at LA with the 236, thought he'd do Boston, boom, went 221. And it's always nice. Like I had another young woman who ran for me a long time ago, and she just got her pilot's wings in the Marine Corps. She's flying Cobra helicopters. But I was the first I was the first person she reached out to, which is tremendously satisfying. I get invited to weddings, but people will reach out always, and all the lessons you learn as a runner, if I'm coaching you, it's about. I tell them all the time, it's like you're going to have a job you don't love, you're going to have a hard marriage, you're going to be raising kids. There's going to be a lot of challenges. Running is going to prepare you for that, and inevitably, it's nice when they come back around and say that, hey, you were right. It's a wonderful thing.
That is a wonderful feeling to be part of people's lives and their sharing of their success with their coaches, and that's a special relationship. It speaks to you as a coach, Coach Mark.
No, thanks. Look, I love to write, but coaching is the best part of my day. It's super fun. You can't BS a bunch of high school kids. You've got to be completely honest. And writing is a very solitary profession. So for me to go out there and talk to 50 kids and design their workouts and coach them through it, it's a wonderful feeling.
Well, I was going to ask you along the lines of the writing there is, now that you've written this book, like what does the long run mean to you now, both metaphorically and literally, as a meaning of life? Like, what have you taken away or learned differently from writing this book?
A friend of mine who writes for the New York Times said that when he read the book, it felt like two people actually going out for a Sunday morning long run and having a long discussion and just chatting. And that's what I hope people take away from it. But I think more from a life lesson point of view, it's one of those things like you can be around running as long as I've been around running in all its guises. So I raced in high school, I raced in college, I did marathons, triathlons, adventure races. I've coached, and they all kind of are one of a kind. And you don't realize how much they influence your daily existence. And it's nice to be thinking about, again, applying for that London Marathon next year. Really hope I get in, because I haven't done a marathon since 2008. Just because I had done so many, I thought it was a 30-year marathon career. I'm kind of done. I really like the idea of going from what I call my Henry David Thoreau period of running, which is I just go out to the trail and just take it easy and enjoy nature. I kind of like the idea of dipping my toe back into competition for not just my runners, but for me. So that's a wonderful feeling, and it's because of the book.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. And you mentioned the trails. I had a couple fun questions to ask you, just to kind of bring out the type of runner Martin is. Are you a Garmin or a no watch or a Timex type of runner?
Garmin.
He's got a Garmin. Okay. Here's one.
But I'll tell you what,
Yep.
Real quick, I resisted. I was never a watch guy until about 4 or 5 years ago. And all of a sudden I realized with Garmin's, you could know exactly how far you'd gone, you know where you'd gone. And it was like, that's kind of neat. So again, I was not a watch guy until, 50 years of running, not until about 5 years ago.
Oh, there you go. I was a big watch guy when I first started 10 years ago, and now I still have it. I use it just to record on like Strava where I'm in the world, so I can go visit back when I'm a bit older and see that. And now, like, I ran my last marathon a couple weeks ago. I did Big Sur. I just left it on time of day. It was recording, but I don't even look at it anymore because I find I have a lot more fun running by not looking at it anymore and not overly obsessing.
And by the way, Big Sur, that is one tough marathon. Congratulations.
That was a toughie. It was tough. I'm come from the Great Lakes region. You know where we are, Martin. It's flat as a pancake. That Hurricane Point, I think I left my pride in Hurricane Point. I'm going to go back and get it, though, I promise.
I've got a fun question. I've got a fun question as well, Martin. Best shoes ever, vintage or modern?
I got to say that I know performance-wise modern are better, but I own some vintage shoes, like an old pair of Tiger Jayhawks, and I'm very partial to the old Nike Waffle Racers. But my favorite shoes of all, Nike Pegasus and Gel Cayano, but they just changed the Gel Cayano format from structured cushioning down to just simple foam, and it breaks down too much on the right-hand side of each, the side of each shoe. So yeah, to tell you the truth, I haven't really tried the big stacks yet. And just because I don't think that they're appropriate to running trails. And so I run in the Gel Trabuco, which is just a nice trail shoe, good tread. But I don't know. I like a lower heel. I don't like the zero drop. I'm not a barefoot guy, but I definitely like shoes that don't have the bigger stack.
Yeah, right. I'm with you, because that bigger stack, I find you're just so far away from the ground that there are so many videos I've taken over the years where when I have like the big cushion shoes on, my legs are doing weird things. And it's because your feet are trying to feel for the ground. You got no feel of the ground. So you're whipping your legs out. And then you put like a thinner shoe on. No, I'm not making barefoot, but like a thinner shoe. And then you run normal and you don't get hurt. So there's something to it, at least my book.
I totally agree with you. And plus the foam breaks down differently than the old EVA midsole. So it's a different feel to it. It breaks down quicker, it compresses quicker. And again, if you're gonna run a trail, and that's all I run are trails because I'm surrounded by forests. When you run with something that's a little bit higher, again, you don't have that connection that you do to the trail, that feeling like of a rock or a root or a rut that you have to jump over or run around. It's just different.
Absolutely.
And asking this question for a friend, but how short of shorts is too short? And is it actually illegal at a certain point?
You know what? I go back to the old Sub 4 and Google Sub 4. Sub 4 had shorts that were almost obscene, but at the same, very short. But one of my favorite things, by the way, is when we get kids who come out for the team who previously played soccer or basketball, and they show up in these shorts down to their knees, and then we give them the team uniform with short shorts and a split short. They look at us like, I can't wear these. I'm naked. It's like, dude, you're going to wear them. And if you don't wear them, you're not going to race. So they get used to them. I don't think, I don't think it's the funny thing about the short shorts. It's a commitment. It's no different than buying a Garmin or just choosing to up your volume. What you're saying is, I want to go faster, and I want to commit more to this. I mean, Bob Cousy wore the same shorts way back in the '60s. So if he can do it on the basketball court, we can do it on the running.
Yeah, and an added perk is fewer tan lines that people can see, right? So it's just.
And as you evolve, Mark, as you evolve as a runner, when you go to the races, and if you see someone show up in the split shorts that are like 1 inch with a mustache, you know you're gonna get killed in that race. So you're like,
and he's gonna wear a singlet. Probably might even have like his old college tan line. So yeah, it's a different thing.
That's awesome.
Well, Martin, I do have one thing. Like, so the long run, we love the book. I read it on my trip to California. I was hanging out in Big Sur reading the book, and that area was just meant for running. I thought it was a great link to the book. And the decade that made the marathon cool, I couldn't help but think this, because we interviewed lots of like trail runners and professional trail runners. And I would say that late 90s, early 2000s, that would have been the decade that made trail running cool. Guys like Karl Meltzer, Scott Jurek, Anton Krupicka, all these guys. So I saw a lot of similarities between this decade and the characters and the icons with some of our heroes that we see in the last 20 years in trail running that we love. And this a lot about listening to their body, being a professional, but not being a professional, if you know what I mean, and love of racing and running. I couldn't help but see a lot of similarities between the trail running community and also the road running community and the marathon community.
It's interesting because, like, when I first began running, I had a coach who he would say, I lived in Sacramento at the time, like, go run up to the Nimbus Dam, which is along the American River, and you had a choice. You could either run on the bike path or you could run on the dirt trails next to the river. And because we were always trying to find a way to cut our run and go jump in the river, we would run on those trails. And so there was no distinction back then between someone who was a road runner and a trail runner. You just were a runner. And I've always been amused by that divergent path with the sport. And I know a lot of people, even right here in my town, like there's a trail that I run where there's a road right next to it. And a lot of people won't even walk their dog on the trail because they prefer to do it on the road. So people are different like that. But I think the wonderful thing about running is if you allow yourself to get off the road and onto the trail, you go to a whole different place. And I think that's where that trail running movement at that time took it. And I think that's why ultra running has exploded now to the fact that people are, what a woman went, 13 and a half minutes a mile for 250 miles the other day.
Yeah, she beat all the men. Yep, at the Cocodona 250. It's amazing, unbelievable. And
I've done a couple ultras, but just only 50K, like dipping my toe in ultra. But I'm way too ADD to imagine 56 hours of running. That is just beyond me.
I can't imagine it. We got a couple of episodes coming out with, we interviewed a couple 200-mile racers, and just to get your mind wrapped around like 4 or 5 days out on the trail, 200 miles. But they made it sound easy. Like we interviewed a buddy, Wes Plate, who's done all the major 200 milers. And I think he calls himself mid-pack elite. That's what he calls himself. But I like sleeping too much. So they were trying to like convince me, and I'm like, I still like to sleep too much. So 50 mile is my max because I can get done in 12 hours and go have a steak, go have a nice sleep.
Yeah.
Nice drink, and the wife doesn't kill me too much because it's a long day for her to be out there too, crewing and having fun.
I had a really good 50K a while back. It's maybe 20 years ago. And it was just one of those things where I thought at the end of the day, it was a very mountainous course. It featured a 14-mile uphill, along with some stuff. I thought I had earned the right to just go home and nap. And my wife instead said, no, we're going to go to these people's houses. We're going to a barbecue. And, oh man, let's just say I shouldn't have driven home that night. That was You had a couple beers and a couple glasses of wine to a 50K on a hot day. That is not a good idea.
That's right. Those electrolytes are low. That beer and the wine are going to go right to the tipsiness.
Just for the sake of time here, Martin, a question I did have is that you serve on the U.S. Track and Field Foundation, or on the board, and you focus on youth running. So what is exciting about the next generation of runners?
Well, I don't want to make it, American, but what I like is that we as a country have learned how to train distance runners. And so we're seeing people like Grant Fisher and Cole Hucker and this whole new generation of male and female runners who are getting better. And one thing about great thing about being on the board is, we're separate from the actually USA Track and Field. Our sole job is to train people for the Olympics. And the amount of money we've been raising in the last 10 years has just gone up and up and up and up. And it's nice to see the fact that we're actually training these amazing athletes who are going to be world champions. And so, where we as a nation are deficient, obviously, is the marathon. That London marathon, the back half of the marathon broke the USA half marathon record as part of a full marathon. So we got a ways to go. For some reason, we can't challenge the Africans yet. But, we're getting better in the 5K. We're getting better in the 10K with the steeple. So one of the things that's great to watch is to see us improve as a country and get very serious about it, because let's face it, 25 years ago, we had fallen off the radar. We couldn't even qualify. We qualified one person, I think, for the 2008 Olympics with a 2:14 or 2:12, which doesn't get you, breakfast anymore at the Olympics. So that's what we do. We help people be better. We provide the money so they can go get physio and go train at altitude and not have to work 3 jobs. And it's tremendously satisfying.
Excellent. That's great. And so we know that long run is out. What's next for you? What's your next passion project? Or can you reveal? Or maybe not.
Or are you just celebrating the crossing the finish line of writing a book?
That's right.
There's a lot of work that goes into this book, Martin.
Go have those beers and steak and some wine, and don't drive anywhere.
I'm a working writer. I mean, I like to write. So I finished the long run probably a year ago, August. So it's been a bit. So I've worked on a couple new running projects. I'd like to do at least one more running book before, I go back into more traditional history, because this was so much fun. And I feel like my writing is a really high level with this book. And because I knew the story so well, I was able to tell it in a unique way. And again, the number one thing people are telling me is like, this is not what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be just a dumb, old, boring history of the running boom. And it's a lot more than that. It takes us up to today. And I like being able to, be a little funny with it every now and then, or a little bit emotional with it, because I was part of it. So I'd like to do at least one more book along this line before I, step off the track, so to speak.
Well, that's great. That is fantastic. The book is dynamite. I learned a lot. I thought I knew some things. I didn't know a ton of stuff. So I love it. I got so many new nuggets out of this book. And I was telling my wife, we were on the plane, I'm like giving her the whole kind of breakdown of how did it end up at 26.2. And, her family's from UK a couple generations ago. So she loved hearing all about the involvement of the royal family and everything. So it was fascinating, even to her as a non-runner, because she just is my photographer, she says. She loved it too. So I was sharing stories with her.
Tell her I said thank you.
And Martin, we just can't thank you enough. And we are going to be cheering for you. We want to see you at the 2027 London Marathon. I got my ballot in too. Maybe we'll do a shakeout run together. If we both get in, it'll be fun. So
excellent.
I will say, my last thing before I go was along the lines of that London thing. The Queen Mary is docked here in Long Beach, and I wrote the book, and I realized only later, as I'm watching footage of the Long Beach Marathon, as they ran past the Queen Mary, that was the same Queen Mary that was responsible for, who played a role in the marathon being 26.2. And it made me so happy. I actually went to my computer and changed the book to add that line about the Queen Mary, because I think everybody, all the 23,000 people running past it that day, nobody realized how influential she was in them running 26.2 that day, which I thought was pretty cool as a big time history geek.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Martin, where can folks find more about you, more about the book?
Oh,
we'll put it in the
thanks
show
for asking.
notes.
So you can buy the book on Amazon.com. Amazon's great. Leave a review. Books, BarnesandNoble.com, Indie Books, Goodreads, all those. You can find more about me. I've got a weekly blog at martindugard.com, which is great. You can join my mailing list or just go look at the blog if you don't want to make that leap. And I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, X. I keep saying Twitter, and then Facebook. So I'm there. So, guys, this has been super, super fun. You guys are fantastic. This is a great podcast.
And Martin, you're fantastic. You're welcome to come on anytime you want to come on, talk about running. And if you do get into London, and we want a full debrief afterwards, so we'll get you back on. We're going to hear about your London experience 20 years after running your last marathon. We love it.
I'll see you there this time next year.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We thank you for listening to the Renegade Podcast. Each episode, we dare to practice the lost art of conversation to better understand this thing we call life and the human connection that we have with running and endurance sport. If you enjoy the Renegade Podcast, could we ask for a favor? Head on over to our YouTube and click subscribe, and like our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your engagement helps keep the Renegade Podcast growing and going. If you have a show idea, a comment, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, renegadepodcast@gmail.com. That's RUNEGADE podcast@gmail.com. We have a great list of guests coming up that we're looking forward to sharing another conversation with you. Head on over to our link tree, check out our sponsors, our friends of the podcast. We have great discount codes that, thanks to them, they're offering you, the Renegade listeners, to save some money on the best running gear, apparel, fuel, and nutrition. We thank you for listening. And remember, in a world of runners, be a renegade.